Welcome to the second of our fall series for campus leaders. And of course, this month, we will be talking about supporting and monitoring instruction. Learning today will be guided by myself, Amy Havard, and by Terry Clement. Again, today we will be talking about supporting and monitoring effective instruction. So as we usually do, we are going to talk first about the why of effective instruction. It is the number one factor that we can do for our students, and then go into the how for supporting effective instruction, and then the how for monitoring effective instruction. So why is it so important for us as campus leaders to both support and monitor effective instruction? Effective teachers are the number one factor in determining student achievement. So that's why we as campus leaders must do everything possible to both support and monitor instruction. That's how you ensure your students are getting what they need to be successful. Also, why? This is a quote from TEA in June 2020. So we don't want to get to the end of the year and be shocked at the academic performance of our students, knowing what's been going on all year. So take just a moment to read that quote. And so what does that mean? We know this is an unprecedented public health crisis, something that people, living right now, most of us have never experienced before. The only thing comparable would be the flu pandemic early in the 20th century. So this is something that, as a society, we're struggling to figure out and to overcome. But we also know that this has the potential to turn into a generational educational crisis, as TEA pointed out back over the summer, because the missed instruction has the potential to compound on itself. What we know about chronic absenteeism data is that the more instruction students miss, the harder it is for them to catch up. So we could be looking at an effect that will be with students for many, many years to come. And so what can we do to make sure that our students come out of this crisis with as much success and being as successful as possible as they can throughout their future? And what can we do is focusing on what we can control. So we know there's a lot that's outside of our control this year. And knowing that there's so many things that are outside of our control, it's more important than ever to use the levers that we can control as effectively as possible. So by effectively using what you can control, that will help mitigate the uncertainty and disruption that you and your staff and your students have and will continue to face throughout the year. So what can you do to support and monitor instruction? That's what's really within your control right now. So now that we know the why of supporting and monitoring instruction, let's dive into the how for that first piece, supporting effective instruction. So how do we support effective instruction? We can focus on three main points when thinking about how to do this. The first of those is clarity of commitments and expectations. The second is systems that support the work. And the third is how to effectively use instructional coaching. So first, clarity of commitments and expectations. Looking at having a defined instructional model for your campus, and also making sure you're using consistent communication, both you as a campus leader, but across your campus leadership team and in every aspect of communication that's going out across your staff and students. So what is that defined instructional model? That's making sure that everyone on the campus really understands how we teach, what are the methods that we use to teach, and what strategies do we use, and having some things in common that we're all familiar with and that we all agree to use. Making sure that these things, the how we teach and the strategies we use, are documented, they're structured, the staff has received both PD and coaching, and of course, looking at the monitoring piece later, all of that is aligned with what is in your defined instructional model. I know we've quoted Brene Brown before, but it's worth repeating very often. And her quote is, "Clear is kind." Clarity is an important way to support instruction and your teachers so that they're successful, but also so that they feel successful at what they do, which is ultimately ensuring that students learn. So clarity is how you get there. So let's look at an example of a campus instructional model where the expectations for how to teach and for what strategies to use are clear for all staff. So I'll give you a moment to look through those examples. First, you see the campus instructional model, which is broken down into a few different levels. You have whole school. So what is it that every classroom, every staff member across the campus knows how to do and is doing as often as possible? Then you have department specific and grade level specific. So there might be things that we use in different departments that are best practice for that content, or there might be things we use in different grade levels because that's best practice for that age of student. But again, being very clear on what those things are so that everyone understands, no matter what position they're in, what it is they have to know and be able to do. So as a teacher on this campus, I would know exactly what to plan for my students. I would feel secure that I was using best practice that was aligned with the needs of those students, because that discussion about best practice had gone into developing the campus instructional model. I also, as a teacher on that campus, would know that any feedback from classroom observations or coaching I received would be aligned with these things. So I could really predict what people were going to say and look for when they came into my classroom. Knowing exactly how to do my job and how to be good at my job is what I would get from having this documented campus instructional model. And of course, knowing that I could work at getting good at those things would lower my anxiety and help me focus that energy in the right direction instead of feeling like I was adrift or that I had to be good at everything. The next thing to look at after clarity is in place is focusing on creating and sustaining systems that support the work of instruction. So creating and sustaining systems that support the work of instruction means that all staff on your campus understand when and how to collaborate effectively with a focus on student learning. So this means protecting that time for collaboration through scheduling, and most of us are already there. You have that time scheduled into your day, but also by providing structures that guide that time. So providing structure could be creating common agendas that all PLCs use and or developing protocols for the different types of collaboration that occurs. Maybe that's a protocol for content study or a protocol for data analysis or looking at student work or the other things that you want happening in that collaboration time. It's also important that administrators participate frequently in the collaboration structures that you design. This is one way to really ensure those systems are there that support the work of instruction. Participating in collaboration is an opportunity for administrators to model being instructional leaders. They also have the opportunity to provide insight from a higher level or a different perspective than the teachers might have within their own PLC. And it's also a way for administrators to keep the pulse on how collaboration is working across the campus. So when you're thinking about those systems and designing those systems that support the work, make sure you're paying attention to just not when, the time to collaborate, or how, the structures, but also ensuring that there is a path for leadership participation throughout. So here is an example of a common PLC agenda that one campus might use. So you can see here that there is a consistent structure that is focused on student collaboration at every level. It allows for the the collaboration, the PLC time, or whatever you have on your campus to actually be led by teachers instead of by instructional coaches or administrators. But you can see that the instructional coach and administrator are present and participate as collaborators, but not necessarily leading the meeting. And of course, this is accessible to all. So by being a common PLC agenda, it's accessible to all teachers. So if you wanted to have your inclusion teachers or different specialists you have across your campus participate in some of the discussions that the grade level teams are having or the content teams are having, it's accessible to them. Now, this example is here later in the PDF that you can click on to scroll through and see. But one way that this could be used is this particular one is a Google Doc. And so it is a sort of set agenda that is copied to the top of the document every time they meet. So the newest meeting is always on top, but you can scroll down to see older meetings. So again, it's a great way to record the collaboration that's going on so that teachers can look back and have a record of the different things that they have discussed and discovered together throughout their collaboration. But it's also a way for administrators or coaches to go in and help to support those discussions and maybe figure out what it is that they need to focus coaching on in the future. So again, afterwards, you can click on that example to see more, to scroll through to see some example discussions that are recorded there. So now that we've talked about both clarity and systems, the last piece to supporting effective instruction is instructional coaching. So most campuses have an instructional coach or have people on campus who do instructional coaching, even if that's not their position. Of course, administrators are also instructional coaches because part of their job is observation, coaching, and feedback. But wanting to really be clear on how we use that instructional coaching effectively to support the work of effective instruction. So instructional coaching, who are those people? Again, all instructional leaders are coaches, administrators, as well as those with the actual title of instructional coach. But then also that might be teacher leaders that you have on your campus. Maybe it's department chairs or people that are have a very successful skill to share with others, and maybe they can act as instructional coaches as well. Making sure that whoever is doing the work across your campus, that they are aligned and accountable to those other things that we've talked about, that coaching is in alignment with your campus instructional model, and that the coaching is aligned across different people so that there is a consistent message and consistent communication going out. What's the purpose of instructional coaching? Of course, to be focused on student goals, to make sure that even though the purpose might be to help a teacher improve in one area or another, or to help a department learn a new best practice that you want to spread across that department, the ultimate focus is on learning those things or improving those things to ensure that students are increasing and becoming more successful. So always want to keep those student-focused goals in mind when we're thinking about how instructional coaching is happening on our campus. And of course, that it is aligned with those campus-wide efforts so that coaching is focused on those things that are outlined with clarity in our campus instructional model. The one thing that we like to remind people of is that also there can be different types of instructional coaching. So everybody is probably very familiar with individual instructional coaching, right? Lots of different models out there about the process of one coach and one teacher, one individual engaging in a coaching cycle. But you can also use instructional coaching for a group. So I mentioned previously in my example, maybe coaching an entire math department on learning a new type of best practice to put into effect. You might also have a group of teachers that are new to your campus that year, and they're an instructional coaching group because you're coaching them all on learning particular strategies that are important to your campus. You can also do instructional coaching at a campus level. And that's what happens when you have a lot of campuses tell us they have a walkthrough focus or they have an observation focus for the week. So for example, Your observation focus for the week might be randomization. Well, that's a type of campus coaching because you have told the campus what it is you expect to see. You've given them some support on what that looks like, and then are following that up through the coaching cycle with observation and feedback. So that might be coaching at a campus level. So there are different types or levels at which you can use instructional coaching. So individual coaching, that can be done by any leader, just making sure that the leaders align and communicate and make sure that is consistent across different people who are coaching. And as I mentioned, really focused on those student-centered goals. So one example of individual coaching might be using Jim Knight's impact cycle with a particular individual. With group coaching, as I said, this could be figuring out your group that is identified by a shared need. So whether that's department or content, grade level, your intervention team, whatever that shared need is, and then offering differentiated support to that group. So that group might be getting something different than the rest of the campus. But as always, making sure that is aligned not just with those student-focused goals, but with your campus focus as well. So whatever it is your campus has determined that is important for everyone to be doing in your instructional model, making sure your coaching is aligned to that. And then the last piece is that campus level coaching. So there are a couple of steps that campus level coaching goes through. So the first is communicating to the entire campus what that expectation might be. So I use the example of randomization. So maybe there's a whole campus PD during staff meetings on structured student talk, specifically for remote students that maybe incorporates randomization or just be on structured student talk. And then the next step would be that instructional leaders actually focus on looking for structured student talk throughout the observation and feedback cycles for a period of time. And that period is determined by your leadership team. So that might be for a few weeks or however long you think you need to gather data on that particular item you're coaching on. And then the third step would be for that leadership team to review the data and really determine a plan for coaching and supporting those people that need it, whether that's the whole campus or particular groups, to support that focus on structured student talk. So that might be one way or one example of using campus coaching. So to support effective instruction, we've talked about 3 different hows: clarity, systems, and then effectively using your instructional coaching.
All right, so we have talked about supporting effective instruction, and we do want to go on to talk now about monitoring for effective instruction. Please join me in embracing monitoring as a positive thing, because when I'm monitoring something, I'm giving it my attention, I'm giving it my focus. It's not a negative thing at all. It's absolutely how we can pay attention to what is happening with instruction on our campus, and we can make those support systems that Amy just shared with us and that you all just shared even more about, even more powerful and effective. So how do we do that? How do we monitor for effective instruction? Let's look at this in 2 avenues. We're going to look at monitoring collaboration and planning. So that is the thought work and the collaboration work that goes into preparing for facilitating learning with students. And then we'll talk about monitoring teaching and learning. And that would be what's actually happening with students and engaging them in any modality, right? In person or remote or hybrid, as so many of us are experiencing right now. When we talk about monitoring collaboration and planning, as leaders, we want to make sure that we're participating in the process. Attend meetings as much as you can. Documentation review is definitely important. See what's being produced, what's being planned for instruction to facilitate instruction, and also using what you observe and participate in collaboration and planning, and using what you find when you review planning documents of the work to provide targeted support. So there might be things that you observe that help you plan your own work as far as which classrooms and learning environments are observed more, or which meetings you would attend more of, because your time has to be strategically scheduled and planned. As such, wanted to share this example with you. So here's for instance, a principal's weekly calendar where you can kind of just scan and see that there are, the yellow is collaboration sessions that a principal could schedule themselves into, as well as there's time for walkthroughs, or in this case, it would be observing learning environments, right? Whether I'm walking through someone's virtual classroom in Google Classroom or Canvas or one of the platforms, or I'm actually visiting rooms, that's scheduled, as well as attendance at meetings. And so it's important that we really plan for our time so that we can manage our time and get that monitoring in that really supports those systems. As well, and we talked about this before in the last section, but this is part of that alignment, is when we go to monitor teaching and learning and facilitating the classroom, we want to align our feedback, which is part of our communication, and align it with our instructional model, align it with our other leaders. So we're using a shared common form. And also that the form we're using right now in the fall of 2020, that we are adjusting those practices so that they work in all modalities. So if you have in-person instruction, remote instruction, or hybrid instruction, you want something that really aligns those practices so that you can get feedback aligned with your instructional model that works for all of those for you and really helps along that support and monitoring of the instruction. Another thing that is critical right now is that to find out how the learning is going, you definitely want to analyze student work. This would involve really taking a look at what students are producing. So it could be traditionally things that they have written down. Of course, that can look a lot of different ways right now. We could actually see journals of students if they're in person and see them that way, or you could see digital representations of the writing that were submitted through anything from a Jamboard or other ways to collect that writing, or even Google Forms. Another thing is to view samples of videos. You may not have time to view all of them, but if students are through Flipgrid or other softwares, if they're submitting video submissions, make some time to take a look at some of those and compare them to the learning plans and collaboration that you observed, and see how is it going. Is there a connection between collaboration and planning and teaching and learning, and are they aligned? Are we getting the experiences for students that we planned for? And then a protocol to discuss and discover trends. I'll go back to communication among leaders. I need to engage in these processes for monitoring teaching and learning, but also systematically have a place for meeting with other leaders on my campus and aligning what we're seeing so that you can discover trends, identify misconceptions, and target your support where it's most needed. Here's an example of how that might go. So imagine that this example campus has Monday meetings where the administrators and instructional coaches meet, and they also, it's scheduled so that that time is protected and that everyone can participate and really focus and structure that conversation so that you can talk about what you've seen, what you've observed, and share that data. The data can then be discussed. That communication is calibrated, as we've been discussing, is so important. Looking at assessment data and what we've observed, and then really be able to identify how things are going. And then you can strategically, as a team, adjust whatever your support is for the coming week according to the needs that are identified through that data analysis. You may increase or decrease or change observation patterns. You may, figure out that there's a need for instructional coaching cycles in one place or another. Systematic updates may be needed. You may identify something going on systematically with a whole grade level or department through what you shared. And then you may identify, wow, we really need this specific professional learning at our next gathering as a staff. So consider that this should be a cycle that you can participate in that will really help you align your language, analyze data together, and really take action to really help lead and support effective instruction on your campus. Here's an example of some things you can talk about with data, because as we go to monitor teaching and learning, assessment data is inevitably part of it. Right now, there are a lot of questions about what's going on with assessment data. So one of the concerns that comes up very often right now is, well, we have assessments, but are they all taking the test? So here's an example of what you could say to shape the language around that question, is to focus on the data that we have. What can we learn from the data that we have? And this is an interesting opportunity right now to think about, well, what can we learn from, if we do have a hybrid model on our campus right now, what could we learn from how students are doing in person versus remote? Because we could learn a lot about that as leaders. Another question that may come up is asking about, wow, I'm really concerned about, are students taking the test at home? Are they getting help? Are they using resources? And that may be a time to reference or draft, if they're not there, a campus assessment norms structures to reassure everyone and to really get together as a campus and focusing on what you can control, right? And then another question that may come up is questions about if we're monitoring instruction and assessment data comes up, and then you have issues with students missing instruction, something to consider as leaders is, is there attendance engagement efforts campus-wide that could be engaged or referenced in this conversation? And once again, we try to focus on what we can control and what we can influence, right, to have a positive response to that. So I just wanted to mention that definitely as a part of teaching and learning. And that is monitoring effective instruction. Once again, I just want to tie that in because you have systems to support effective instruction, and then monitoring is actually the full circle of following up on that and supporting those.